This happened when I was living in a rundown apartment back in my college days. The day wasn't much different from many others. I was sitting in my room, drinking beers. By the time the sun went down, I was completely hammered. The beers made me feel pretty sleepy, so I thought I would go to bed early. Looking back on that kind of lifestyle gives me pangs of embarrassment. I was so lazy and lacked motivation. I couldn't even be bothered to clean up my own room. It was so cluttered with trash, dirty dishes, clothes, empty cans, and the odd textbook. I was a lousy student. I had just enough room to crawl into bed each night. It helped that I had a loft bed, so at least when I went to bed, I was slightly elevated above trash level. Anyway, I headed to bed early and slipped into a sound sleep. I was rudely awoken by the sound of knocking at the door. I woke up and thought, what time is it? When I looked at my phone, I realized it was just after 8 p.m. I thought it might be someone complaining or a door-to-door salesman, and I was way too comfortable in my bed to get up and deal with any of that. So I went on ignoring it, but the knocking continued. I had no choice but to go and check it out. When I opened the door, I was still half asleep and completely drunk. I was in complete shock to see not one, not two, but many police officers standing out there with the landlord. I had only ever met the landlord once. One of the police officers was showing me something. I had no idea what it was. I was tired and drunk. It was probably a search warrant or something like that. They got tired of me not understanding what they were talking about pretty quickly because, before I knew it, some of the officers were pushing past me and into my apartment. I stood there for a while, then remembered the state of my apartment. It was ridiculously dirty, and the landlord was here. I thought I better get in there and attempt to clean the place up. I pushed past the officers who stood around me and went into the room. Thinking back on it now, I could have gotten in trouble with the cops for obstruction, but somehow I didn't. As soon as I went into the room, I saw it. I saw what they were here for. The policemen were pulling something out of the attic hatch wrapped in plastic. It was a long object. I was then brought back to the door by the officers and escorted out of my apartment. I was given a room in a hotel for the night. I had no idea what the hell was going on, but I knew it must have been something serious. The next morning, I was interviewed by the police. Well, I wasn't ready for what came next. The officer told me that human remains had been removed from my apartment. I was asked all manner of questions that I could barely answer. The answer to them all was simple. It wasn't me. I didn't know it was there. But convincing them that I was that ignorant was difficult. I guess it was kind of good that they saw my pigsty of an apartment, because at least then they understood the filth I was living in masked the smell of decomposition from the attic. Eventually, I was informed that I wasn't a suspect in the case. I asked if the person who lived in the apartment before me smelled or suspected anything. The officer alluded to a kind of preservative on the body, which may have hidden the smell so no one noticed it before I moved in. Not the landlord or the cleaning staff they hired. The officers only got wind of the possibility of a body being up there when an informant told them that the previous resident had said something about the attic. I wasn't happy. I had to move, and that's sort of where my experience ends. I will say that living with a corpse above me was a unique and creepy experience, and it did make me a little more hygiene and safety cautious. I'd even say that it made me more motivated too. Who knows, maybe being that close to death had an effect on me. I have given this a lot of thought over the years. It's mind-blowing that I was in that apartment for almost a year and had no clue what was up there in the attic. And all that separated me from the body was a thin layer of ceiling. I wonder if the corpse was facing down while I was sleeping facing up, because sometimes I had trouble sleeping in that bed. I always felt as if someone was watching me. Hello students. If you enjoy my content, please consider subscribing to my channel. I noticed that a lot of you who watch my videos aren't subscribed. Subscribing helps you stay updated with my latest videos and supports the channel, allowing me to create more awesome content for you. Thanks for watching. Growing up, I put away urban legends and rumors as if they were childhood toys. By the time this experience took place, I had been climbing and hiking in the mountains for about 3 years. I had grown quite independent in that time. By that, I mean I was more than willing to head out alone on hiking and camping trips. I had always been quiet, but in recent years I had grown quietly confident, and there is a difference. I had been accustomed to solo ventures for a while, but I hadn't tried one out in winter. So I thought, what the hell, why not? Snow was falling from the morning, but it wasn't thick snow, only a couple of centimeters deep. I will admit that there was some small increase in the difficulty brought on by the fresh, wet snow. Thinking back on it, I felt a little uneasy that morning. I remember heading up the trail a little more cautiously than usual. I wasn't really sure if I was even heading in the right direction. The snow made it difficult to see where I was going. I gained a little more confidence in the direction I was heading when I noticed some footprints in the snow. When you're walking into the wind, you naturally look at the ground more often than looking at what's in front of you to avoid snow blindness and the wind buffeting your face. So when I saw the footprints, I kind of felt as if a weight had been lifted from my chest. All right, I'm on the right track. That's great, I thought to myself. I took a breather and stooped to take a look at the footprints a little more carefully. I wanted to see if I could figure out which direction to go next. It was only when I took a closer look that I noticed something strange. I didn't see a recognizable shoe print. What I mean by that is that it didn't look like the owner of these footprints was wearing mountain climbing boots. The prints looked way too thin to be from a big, clunky hiking boot. It was strange. At that point in my life, like I said before, I had been hiking for about 3 years, and I knew that the route I was on was not a maintained one. It felt more like a passage for animals rather than humans, if you know what I mean. Those footprints almost made me turn back for that very reason. They were footprints, not boot prints. There were no shoe prints in the fresh snow. But somewhat foolishly or bravely, depending on how you see it, I continued. I continued up into the mountains in the falling snow with no real direction in mind, confident that I would just somehow know how to get back down without issue. My confidence waned a little after I took a break for lunch. It was winter, so the dark came in quicker than it would in summer. The footprints were jarring, but now the light was dying. That was different. It was time to turn back. I headed back down the mountain, and after a short while, I noticed that I had quickened my pace. Something caused me to slow down, though something unusual. Those thin, non-boot footprints were back, and there were a lot of them now. I could see at least 3 sets of footprints. Freaked me out. I cannot lie. It honestly felt as if I was alone on the mountain range on these trails. I hadn't run into another soul, let alone heard someone. Those were definitely barefoot footprints. The snow was thicker come the late afternoon, and I could make out imprints of individual toes. Do you want to know the thing that really scared me about those footprints? They were alongside mine. They looked as if they had followed me up and back down. This wasn't a maintained hiking trail. I thought back on the advice I had received from a veteran climber. I thought it was just a load of old nonsense when he told me at first, but somehow I believed it when I was confronted by the situation I was in. Don't climb the mountains on the first day it snows. You'll see things and experience things that you aren't supposed to. The first snow of winter is deadly. Panic was close by. I couldn't stop thinking about the footprints. Now I realized I might have migrated from the trail I was supposed to go down. I figured that I would just follow the footprints and get back on the trail, but I was wrong. I used up so much of my energy trying to get back on the trail that I just ended up becoming distressed. I remember the word, distressed, popping into my head. I didn't have much choice. I was tired and lost, and I was losing light. I decided to camp and try to descend in the morning. I wasn't happy about it because I wasn't as prepared as I could have been or should have been, but it wasn't like I had a choice. I literally just had an aluminum foil blanket and a pack of matches. Luckily, I found a big rock I could kind of shuffle under to protect myself from the wind. Thinking back on it, I should never have gone hiking somewhere I was unfamiliar with so few supplies. Even though it snowed and was still kind of snowing, the wind had died down, and I was certain that I wouldn't freeze to death. Either way, I thought to myself I wouldn't be sleeping. So, I laid down on my rucksack to have a barrier from the cold ground and wrapped that foil blanket around me. Well, I didn't have much else to do apart from think about my situation. I thought about the footprints I had seen, and I felt a chill that wasn't due to the weather. I was thinking that maybe those footprints could be from an animal, perhaps a deer, a wild boar, or a rabbit. Then I realized that I was trying to deceive myself. I knew that the footprints were far too big and too human-like to be from animals. After a short while, it was pitch black out, and I found myself dozing and then jolting awake. I slipped off to sleep for a short while and then woke to the sound of snow crunching. You know, the sound of someone treading on freshly fallen snow. It sounded like it was approaching from behind the rock I was under. I thought it was an animal, so I shouted loudly to try and scare it off. When I yelled, I heard the footsteps trail off. I guessed that it was probably something like a wild boar. A few moments went by, and I was wide awake now. I heard the footsteps coming back towards the rock I was under. They sounded a little further away than before, and there was something different about these footsteps. It sounded like it wasn't just one set of footsteps. I thought to myself, oh, you brought your friends, huh? It did freak me out. Wild boar attacks are a thing over here, and they can be fatal. I decided to shout out again and try to scare them off. The footsteps stopped, and I thought I was triumphant. But then the footsteps started up again. They started heading towards me and my rock. It was pitch black, and I couldn't really gauge how far away those footsteps were in the dark. But they sounded as if they were creeping closer and closer. I thought about the footprints I saw earlier that day and how human-like they looked. I thought about the sound I had heard, and it sounded more and more like walking, not the scuffle of animal hooves or paws. I had never felt terror like that before. Were there people out here with me in the dark? There were more of them than me, and I couldn't see a thing. I sat there under the rock, and for some reason I started to pray. I'm not a religious person, but something my grandfather taught me came to mind. It was a Buddhist chant. I closed my eyes and started chanting. I knew there weren't wild boars out there. There were humans out there. I tried to remember and not mess up the chant, but it was near impossible since the footsteps were getting closer and closer. I could hear the squeak and crunch of the snow right behind the rock. I still couldn't see them, though. I just tried to brace myself for whatever would come next. The footsteps started circling me. I felt all hope of seeing the morning light fade away. I was beyond petrified at this point. I just kept chanting, expecting to hear the rushing of footfalls coming towards me. But for some reason, that didn't happen. They kept their distance and I kept chanting. After a while, it began to get brighter and brighter out. The footsteps got further and further away as the light grew brighter. My anxiety was lifting, and I was relieved. By the time I saw the sunrise, I could no longer hear the footsteps. I looked around in amazement. There were dozens of footprints in the snow all around my makeshift campsite. I was exhausted, but I couldn't help but stand there and stare at those footprints. It looked as if some people had been barefoot when they were circling me last night. Staring at the footprints really scared me, so I packed up and made my descent. After about half an hour or so, I managed to find the trail I had climbed up the night before. The footprints didn't follow, and I heard no signs of humans on the way back. The whole ordeal mentally exhausted me and single-handedly destroyed my interest in hiking and mountain climbing. I work in a group home for the developmentally disabled, and my usual shifts are overnight, beginning at 11 p.m. and ending at 9 a.m. the next day. Let me tell you, this place is haunted. I've been working here for a solid 6 months now, and some really strange things have happened. For the first 4.5 months, nobody lived in the basement apartment of the home. Whenever you went down there, it was really creepy. To mention, this is a furnished basement apartment with its own kitchen, living room, bathroom, and bedroom, meant to house clients who stay for a certain amount of time. Whenever it's empty, though, it always sounds like something is down there, whether it be a person talking or walking, or hearing the doors close and stuff like that. As a result, I keep the door connecting the basement to the top floor locked, but that doesn't stop whatever is down there. One night, as I was awake, I heard solid, heavy footsteps make their way up the stairs to the top. Then I heard the door handle try to turn, which almost put me into an anxiety attack. I'll admit, I texted my coworker, who didn't help at all. She began sharing her own experiences with the house that were very similar to mine. After the first 4.5 months, we had a client who permanently moved into the basement. Best thing to ever happen. Why? Because we just chalk up all the noises to them now. However, one shift I was working, they asked if I could go downstairs and help them. I went downstairs and we got to talking. They mentioned how sometimes they think the basement is haunted. They mentioned how they sometimes hear walking around and how one night they heard someone turn on the lamp in the living room. They heard the click of the string being pulled. Another incident occurred when the client wasn't home. Due to certain policies, we keep cameras in the upstairs and downstairs apartments in the living rooms. I was on the phone with my boss as the upstairs camera stopped working, and they were guiding me through how to reset it. While waiting for it to boot up, they checked the camera downstairs and asked me to do a quick check on the client. I informed them that the client wasn't home. My boss then said they could hear walking and somebody coughing down there. I can tell you right now that it was none of the clients upstairs. They were sitting on the couch the entire time watching TV, and none of them had coughed. So I quickly went downstairs with my boss on the phone. As I said, there was no one down there. It was completely insane. The next recent incident involved the little black cubed alarm clock we have. This alarm clock is set to go off at 6 p.m. to remind staff that it's med time. One night on my overnight shift, I was just laying in the dark, browsing through social media on my phone, when the radio of the clock turned on out of nowhere. The volume slowly went up, then quickly went down, and then it just shut off again. After that, you can bet your bottom dollar that I unplugged that thing. It's in a separate room now, and I'm just done with all of this. This happened when I was about 9 or 10 years old. I have a sister who is 8 years younger than me, so she was around 1 or 2 years old at the time. During the summer months in Calgary, Canada, my family, along with 3 or 4 other families, would frequently have barbecues in Bonus Park. For those unfamiliar with this park, it's a large park in Calgary with numerous picnic areas, playgrounds, and fountain areas for kids to play in. The area is so vast that it takes about 5 to 10 minutes to walk between the playground, picnic areas, bathrooms, and other facilities. We kids would often leave the adults to go play in the fountains or the playgrounds, and it was generally safe enough that this never caused any issues. I recall one time we were playing in our little bathing suits when I saw a tall guy with glasses and a large cowboy hat sitting on a bench just outside the fountain area, watching us. As a naive kid who had never been warned about stranger danger, I automatically assumed he was a park ranger because of his cowboy hat. A couple of hours after leaving the fountains to eat and relax with the adults, my baby sister announced that she needed to use the bathroom. She was nearly potty trained, but not completely. My mother asked me to take her to the bathrooms, which were about a 10-minute walk away. My friend, who was about my age, came along with me. I remember walking with them when this guy came up to us and started a conversation. He was wearing the cowboy hat, and I again assumed he was just another park ranger. He asked for our names and ages and had a very friendly demeanor, so we talked openly with him. However, I noticed he had a particular interest in my baby sister and at one point even asked to hold her. She was fussy and just wanted to walk, though. This continued until we reached the bathrooms, where we said goodbye to him and went in. At this point, even my naive self started to feel like something was wrong. My sister ended up having an accident, so I asked my friend to stay with her in the bathroom while I ran back to the picnic area to get a change of clothes from my mother. When I stepped out of the bathroom, I found that same guy standing a couple of feet away, clearly waiting for something. That was when my alarm bells started going off. I ran back to the picnic area and told my mom that I thought someone was following us. She came with me to the bathroom, and when the guy saw me with my mother approaching from about 100 meters away, he booked it, power walking in the opposite direction as fast as possible without attracting attention. At the time, I pretty much forgot about what had happened. It wasn't until a couple of years later that I suddenly realized the man waiting for us outside the bathroom was the same man who had been watching us play in our bathing suits hours before. I can only assume he had been waiting for hours until we left the adults after swimming to approach us. Also, that particular park did not have any park rangers. I don't know exactly what his true intentions were, but I'm pretty sure they were not good. I was 15 at the time and spending the weekend at my best friend's house. My name is Tara, and two of my other friends, Jade and Shauna, were there too. Our friend Jack lived across town and wanted us to come over to hang out. It was a 10 to 12 minute walk to get there, but it was 9 p.m. on a Saturday night, and Talia was skeptical about walking across town in the first place, so she just stayed behind. The rest of us figured that since there were 3 of us walking, we should be safe. For the most part, we were. We got to Jack's house, and he had been drinking from his mother's liquor cabinet. We were 17 at the time, and 2 acquaintances who were dating and having problems were drinking too. It was annoying for me to be there, if I'm being honest, since none of us wanted to drink, and one of the acquaintances was drunkenly spilling her life story to me about how she wanted to break up with her boyfriend because she was in love with her ex and yada yada yada. At 11:30 p.m., Jade and Shauna decided to call Talia's mom, who treated us as if we were her own children, to come and pick us up because no one wanted to walk back at almost midnight, even though there were 3 of us. The drunk girl didn't want to leave, so I felt bad and stayed behind, telling Jade and Shauna that I'd walk back later on. I just didn't have a concept of fear. According to rumors at school, I was one of the most intimidating girls in my class, always carried a pocket knife, was going through my goth stage, etc. I knew the town like the back of my hand too, so I didn't think it was such a big deal. I finally left, and this is where it gets creepy. So, I'm walking back across town to Talia's house by myself, texting Jade the whole time to make sure she was still awake to open the door for me. It was 12:30 a.m. and I was walking fairly fast, almost jogging, because I just had a feeling about being out by myself that night. I kept up the pace. I made it to the main street in town, and Talia's house was 2 or 3 blocks away. A straight shot, pretty much. I looked both ways before crossing Main Street, and there was one car coming from my right in the distance, driving about 45 miles per hour, I'd say. So, I bolted across the street before the car came up. As soon as I did that, the car came to a screeching halt and whipped onto the road I was walking on. Luckily, I heard the screeching tires, and my instincts instantly kicked in. I darted into the bushes in front of somebody else's house because my brain quickly comprehended that something didn't seem right about a car driving so fast down the road. The speed limit in this town was like 25 miles per hour at this time of night, then making this quick turn out of nowhere. I stayed crouched in the bushes. They were pretty thick and I was wearing all black. Luckily, I had the night to my advantage, and I watched this car slowly creep down the road next to the house I was hiding outside of, almost like the people in the car were looking for me. I held my breath and watched it continue down the road and turn around in a parking lot, then head back up to Main Street. As soon as the car got to the stop sign opposite where I was going, I bolted, and I have never run so fast in my life. All the while, I was texting Jade with my difficult flip phone, telling her to open the door now. Everything was like it was on cue. I made it to the front steps of Talia's house, and as soon as I got to the first step, Jade opened the door. That same car came flying down the road I was on, hitting the gas and revving the engine, passing the house. It honestly felt like the person or people in the car were mad. Jade saw me, out of breath, barging into the house, asking me all these questions, and as soon as she locked the door, I told her everything. The next morning, I told Talia, Shauna, and Talia's mom about what happened. Talia's mom went pale because apparently, a man had been caught a few towns away from ours for stalking and assaulting another woman around the same late hours of the night. She pulled up the news report on her phone, and we read it, and I instantly recognized the car as the same one. If you want more stories like this, please subscribe to my YouTube channel to be updated in my latest uploads. Thank you for watching.